If I could get your attention briefly. Thank you. We're going to start. Oh, I keep seeing students that I recognize. Hi over there. And keep eating your dinner, enjoying your meal, but we're going to get a start. To begin tonight, I'd like to introduce Michael Connell, who will be paying tribute to James Loper tonight. Michael has a long history of involvement with public broadcasting, including serving as the past chair of KCET. He's the managing partner of the law firm Morrison & Forster, and he's also a past chair. You're not? Did I say it wrong? He's shaking his head. Oh, no. He'll correct me. He's also a past chair at the LA Philharmonic and president of the Michael J. Connell Foundation. Michael?
Thank you, Judy. That was a kind of accurate presentation, and certainly good enough for any event, and I appreciate it. Thank you. You know, tonight's presentation is one in a series named after James Loper, as you can see from the slide over there. And it's only fitting to take a moment to remember Jim and his dedication to public broadcasting and to USC. I don't know how many of you knew Jim, but for those of you who did not, I can only say you missed an extraordinary opportunity. Jim passed away in the summer of last year, and it's a great loss to all of us here. Dr. Loper was a true pioneer in public broadcasting, and he maintained a passion for the medium from his early association in the 1960s until his death last year. In the 1960s, Jim joined a small group that was trying to establish a public television station in Los Angeles, a group that included, among other people, my mother, who was a volunteer at the station in its early days. Subsequently, when that effort was successful, he became vice president and general manager, and then president of the local public television station. He served in those capacities for more than 16 years. During his tenure, he was instrumental in creating some of the great television programming of the day, including Hollywood Television Theater, the Andersonville Trial with George C. Scott, and Cosmos with Carl Sagan. I think that Jim might wonder about my reference to Cosmos, because I think it was one of the great trials and tribulations of his career as well. But it won award after award after award. Later in his career, he taught a course on the subject of public broadcasting at USC and was among the first to address the challenges that currently face public broadcasting today. He saw how the media was changing far ahead of others who were examining the same issues. He saw how public broadcasting was focusing more and more on a narrow, aging audience. More importantly, though, he advocated for changes to make public broadcasting more relevant and sustainable. I believe it was his hope that these lectures that bear his name would further this process. Jim was a wonderful person. He overcame great personal challenges and handicaps without ever losing his sense of humor. Jim was my friend for more than 40 years. I cannot think of a more fitting way to honor his memory than with this lecture tonight. Thank you for your attendance tonight, and special thanks on behalf of Jim for your efforts to keep public broadcasting alive and well. Thank you very much. Thanks, Judy.
Thank you, Michael, for those touching remarks. It's interesting that Cosmos has come back, so the legacy lives on with Neil deGrasse Tyson. So, a long legacy. Before I introduce our next speaker, I want to remind you that there's going to be time for a little audience Q&A after our speaker. And so as you're listening tonight, be thinking of questions you might like to ask. And now, I'd like to introduce, and it is my honor to introduce, the Dean of the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism, Ernest J. Wilson III. Dr. Wilson, I have a lot to say about him. More about Dean Wilson. He's also the Walter H. Annenberg Chair in Communication. And under the Dean's stewardship of our great school, our accomplishments are legion. That's what it says here, and we're not modest. Since his arrival, and it's true, we have seen a dramatic increase in the number of our faculty. We've acquired important centers, such as the U.S.-China Institute. We've opened the Vanguard Annenberg Innovation Lab. We've launched popular new minors, such as sports media studies, and important initiatives, such as M2E. That stands for Media, Economics, and Entrepreneurship. You'll hear more about that tonight. The school has also embarked on online education, expanded our global exchange programs, and of course, our second building is going up on campus. It's the state-of-the-art Wallace Annenberg Hall. Dean Wilson brings to our school his experience at the intersection of communication and public policy. This impressive experience spans the private and public sectors. Dean Wilson has served as a consultant to international agencies, including the World Bank and the United Nations. He's worked in government at the White House National Security Council and the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. Dean Wilson has also led research centers and academic departments at the nation's premier institutions of higher ed. His own research focuses on topics such as China-Africa relations, global sustainable innovation in high-tech industries, and the role of politics in the diffusion of information and communication technologies. Last year, Dean Wilson was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, joining the ranks of what the Academy recognizes as this generation's greatest thinkers and doers. Please join me in welcoming Dean Ernest Wilson.
Good evening, everyone. Come on, this is a communication school and journalism school. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. All right, that's a good start. That's a good start. Thank you, Judy, for that very generous introduction that my staff wrote. We had the honor of serving on a search committee. We worked together on a search committee. We've hired a new director of the journalism school, Willow Bay, and we're absolutely delighted that she's going to be joining us and bringing us her energy and commitment. This is really one of my favorite events of the year, and it's partly because of Jim Loper, largely because of Jim Loper, the kind of man he was, the kind of leader that he was, and his commitment to public service. And it's easy to forget public service in the hurly-burly of our lives, but public broadcasting is at the heart of public service. And he was someone who stood for that and put his energy and his commitment to where it was really important in public broadcasting. And so, as someone who spent 10 years on the Corporation for Public Broadcasting Board, when I come to this event every evening, I feel like I'm coming home, because we wouldn't be here if we were not concerned about public broadcasting important issues in very interesting ways. So let me start by acknowledging a few folks in the room who have joined us tonight. One is my very dear friend and colleague, Tom Sales, who's the Senior Vice President for University Relations. I'd like Tom just to stand and be recognized. Thank you, Tom. Also members of our USC Annenberg Alumni Board of Advisors, and I would like you to stand and be recognized. Hold your applause until everyone has stood. Patty Johnson. Patty, I think, there's Patty. Please remain standing. Scott Tamkin also is here. And, of course, Corey Bird. Please, so if you would please recognize them, each and every one. Thank you. And Corley has been newly appointed to the USC Alumni Association Board of Governors. So double congratulations to you, Corley. Thanks so much. We have a calendar that is jam-packed with events, but this event is really, really very special, the Loper Lecture. Throughout the years, we have had one media luminary after the next who has come to share her thoughts or his thoughts with us at this event. Our speaker tonight, Guy Raz, more than fits the bill. Tonight, and all the tonights past in this lecture series, come to us thanks to the life and times of a great man and a great friend, as I had mentioned earlier, Jim Loper. And I'd like to just take a moment of silence just to recognize and remember Jim. So if we could just pause for a moment and think of him. Thank you. In addition to his many professional achievements, as you've heard already, Jim was a tremendous friend of the school. He would teach for us every semester. And he wanted to teach more, and we would allow him. We would embrace him and say, yes, please do teach more stuff. And thank you for sharing him, by the way, with, to teach. And he was a great friend of the students and was a great model for the students, that there was something called public broadcasting, public service broadcasting, that they should aspire to in the same way that they aspire to the commercial world, which has its own role, but public broadcasting has a very special role. And for that, I'm delighted, and Mary Lou Loper is here this evening. I just want to thank her for her continued support and for coming this evening. So if we could just recognize Mary Lou. And I think Jim and Mary Lou's children are here. James Loper Jr. is here. Please stand and be recognized. And Elizabeth as well, his daughter. Thank you all for being here. This is part of the extended Annenberg family, and we do appreciate your presence here. I would also like to thank and recognize the generosity of the H. Russell Smith Foundation. It was really their gift that made all of this possible from the very beginning. And it was made to establish the Loper Lecture. I think they're not here, Russell's not here this evening, but I know he's here with us in spirit. And I think we're going to make a telephone call, is that right, Mary? Earlier?
I haven't been able to reach him, but I'll
Good. Well, give him our love and best wishes. This is the first time he's missed it in 100 years old. Not a bad thing to aim for and to achieve. This is a very interesting and busy time of year, as everyone knows, especially those of you who will be graduating in about a week, next Friday. And so this is a very busy time for us. We're lucky because as you know, there's a large graduation, and then each school has graduates. This year, for our journalism program, Bill Davis, who is at KPCC, who's the CEO there, will be giving the graduation speech. And we're really delighted about that, given our links to public broadcasting. And then we have a mild-mannered traditional speaker for communications, who is the famous and award-winning musician and producer, Mr. T-Bone Burnett. Jazz, all sorts of crazy music, right? So it turns out he's also a real public intellectual. He is really engaged with issues of broadband security. And so we had an event with the chairman of the Federal Communications Commission, Tom Wheeler. And he said, I want someone from Hollywood who could really, or this town, who could come in and talk about these technical issues. So we were unable to find anyone to do that until we remembered T-Bone. And he came in and held his own. So he'll be speaking on Friday for the communications students graduate. I think you saw the fly-through, the animated fly-through of the new building. If you have not had a hard hat tour, hurry up and take the damn tour. Because soon you won't need a hard hat. And you won't be able to brag to your friends that I took a hard hat tour through the building. But it is really very cool. And we say this is a new era, new programs, and a new building. So just talk to Diana or her team, and they will be happy to give you a tour. So we're really close to finishing the building. We will be moving in, staff will be moving in June and July. We give our first course in August. So we have this wonderful, beautiful box, wonderful windows. We still need some help with our infrastructure. It turns out this communications thing is really serious. Who knew? And it turns out that we need laptops, and we need special rooms for laptops, and we need instructional areas, and we need people who know how to teach this stuff to old people like me, as well as to young people who will be coming into the school. So far we have raised, I do have to say that the president gave us a goal of $150 million to raise, and is it 2.5 years? Was it? 2.5 years, we've raised $106 million. So that's not terrible. But we're not there yet. And the building especially really needs the support of our alums and our friends. Wallace Annenberg gave the majority of the support, and we're eternally grateful for her, but some of the more technological issues, including finishing our 3-story, this is very cool, 3-story media wall. So you really have to come in and see that. But in addition to the support for the building, it's ultimately about ideas. It's ultimately about educating the next generation. And the building is not just a container of ideas, it's a connector. The rooms are not hermetically sealed. They're all connected to one another and to the students. We've been fortunate this year to raise money for the Jane and Hans Hufschmidt Chair in Strategic Public Relations and Business Communications, one of the first in the United States of America to join those two fields. We have been lucky enough to have the Jackson Fellowship in Science and Technology, which has been generously donated by one of our graduates. We're very excited about the Donatelli Expert in Residence in Political Media and Analysis. Very excited about that. We'll be bringing to campus someone who is every year who is an expert in that field, joining other experts in residence that we have. So I do really invite you, please come and look at the building. It's a beautiful building, not only for those who will come and see it once or twice, but more importantly for the students who will come to that building for the next 100 years. Think about that. It's opening in July, and young people, open, fresh minds will be coming to that building for the next couple hundred years. We're very excited about that. We've also had doing wonderful work not only in the technical side, but also in the arts, which is very close to the heart of the president of the university, and also very close to my heart and the heart of our faculty. We have a wonderful program in arts journalism. We were skeptical that arts journalism could be supported. Lo and behold, guess what was the most popular graduate journalism program? It was arts journalism. And we're lucky enough to have here the woman who made it happen, Sasha Anawal. Sasha, please raise your hand. And Sasha is a special example, but one example of the kind of faculty that we have at the Annenberg School for Communication and Journalism. When the good things go good, I try to take credit for it, but the reality is that the couple hundred wonderful faculty that we have, like Sasha, make it all possible. It really is a delight, and there are other faculty here this evening from the communication side. I see Taj here, Taj Fraser, one of our assistant professor, who, well, you speak Mandarin and all these other, so he is one of our China experts who has done great work in this field. So let me turn to Guy Raz, our speaker tonight, and it really is a treasure and a special event for him to come here this evening. And I say this having spent 10 years on the CPB board, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which we pretend to have nominal influence over what people like about to, but they don't really pay attention to what we do. But that's okay, we give them cash, more importantly. And if you've ever listened to Guy's show, shows plural, then you're likely to have had one of those driveway moments. How many of you have had a driveway moment? Okay, so, oh, sure, you all know the story already. So the driveway moment is when, you're coming back from work, it's late at night, it's raining, you want to get in, unthaw something for dinner, and there's something on NPR, right? And you say, okay, I'll just sit here in the rain, sweating, and listen, and then you look up and it's 20 minutes later, and Guy and his colleagues have kept you in the car listening because it's a human story. It's information told in an important way. And Guy is really a great example of that. He's the host of TED Radio Hour, a co-production of NPR and TED, which I think, as everyone in the room knows, is a very important institution in the United States for the development and propagation of ideas at the cutting edge. You really should listen to that. Guy also suffers from the affliction of being a native Californian, aren't you, Guy, if I'm not mistaken? But he overcomes that because he's really from LA, not the northern part of the state. So he's really one of us. And Guy also represents what we at the Annenberg School have come to call the third space thinking. It's not the first space of engineers, and it's not the second space of MBA types, but it's the third space of people who tend to think 360 degrees, who think outside the box, who are able to combine technology and strategy and business and content creation. In other words, ideas. And he really represents that. I have to say that TED Radio is the fastest growing program in public radio history and one of the top podcasts in the United States. Before TED, our speaker was the weekend host, some of you may remember this, of NPR's All Things Considered. Among other innovations, he came up with the idea of the cover story feature and the 3-minute fiction contest, which sounds like some of the students I've had in my classes who explained why a paper is late. But much of Guy's career has been spent with NPR, with the exception of 2 years working as CNN's Jerusalem correspondent, so he's been in tough neighborhoods and knows how to report on tough neighborhoods. And I'm delighted to read that Guy began with NPR in 1997 as an intern for All Things Considered. By the year 2000, Guy was NPR's Berlin bureau chief, reported from more than 40 countries, including covering the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And in 2007, Guy came back to the United States to become NPR's defense correspondent. In addition to all this activity, he's been recognized for all that activity and is the winner of the Edward R. Murrow Award, which is very prestigious, as many of you know, and the Daniel Shore Journalism Prize. And I know that that must be particularly meaningful for Guy because, as I understand it, his first NPR gig was working as Mr. Shore's assistant. So he's been a part of a team that's won awards. He's won DuPont Awards, a Peabody. So it doesn't get better than this. He's even taught at 2 reasonably decent universities back east. Sorry, Princeton and Georgetown. It's not chopped liver. And Guy has interviewed and profiled 6,000 people in his career. And we really are thrilled. This is the purpose of this wonderful, wonderful series, to get people who can share fresh experience on a very, very important issue, which is presenting information in the public interest in ways that are really interesting. And nobody does that better than our speaker this evening, Guy Raz. Come to me.
Wow, Dean Wilson, can we travel together? Can you come back with me to Washington? Thank you for that introduction. It's humbling and quite generous, and I really appreciate being here. To the Loper family, thank you for allowing me to honor Mr. Loper tonight. It really is an honor for me to be here. You know, I often find myself inadvertently disappointing people when they meet me because because a voice creates, you know, a particular image in people's minds. And so, you know, every single person hears somebody in a different way, and usually people say, I thought you had a giant gray beard. And I'm sorry that I don't. I'm trying to grow it. It's coming in slowly, but I'm working on it. I have to say, it is really a nice change to be around such elegantly dressed people. I was recently at the TED conference. It was in Vancouver. They moved it to Vancouver from here in Southern California. And at TED, there is a direct correlation between how wealthy you are and how shabbily dressed you are. So I'm assuming you all must be very poor. So I kind of think of the Loper Lecture as a kind of a State of the Union address of public media and public broadcasting in my case. And so if I were to sum it up, I would say that the state of our union in public radio is exciting. And by exciting, I mean terrifying, uncertain, but open to amazing new possibilities that will, in my view, change everything about the way we operate. Now, before I freak you all out, let me say that what I hope to do tonight is to illustrate some of our challenges, but also some of the potential solutions to those challenges. So I want to sort of begin with a brief history lesson. Here we have Edward R. Murrow. Dean Wilson mentioned Daniel Shore, who was my first boss, and Dan was the last living link to Edward R. Murrow, because Edward R. Murrow is, as I said today to students at the Annenberg School, is like, you know, the Lake Victoria to our Nile. He is the source of everything we do in public radio for sure, and I would say in broadcasting as a whole. And, you know, radio had its golden age in the 30s and the 40s, and this was the guy who sort of ushered that in. But then he actually kind of destroyed it by being really good at television, too. And that kind of ended the golden age of television, and people stopped listening for a long time. And then we all know what happened in the early 1970s. Something really magical happened. And it was people like Bill Siemering and Noah Adams and Susan Stamberg who sort of pioneered a new form of radio journalism, radio storytelling, news that was storytelling. And for the next 4 decades, as many of you know, NPR would experience explosive growth. So by 2010, 28 million Americans were listening to NPR programming, public radio programming, every single week. Now, as we were reaching our peak in the last decade, the newspaper business was experiencing a collapse that was rapid and was not entirely anticipated. And as newspapers started to give away their content for free online, they quickly realized that the public would always expect to get it for free. So all of a sudden, newspapers were kind of operating like public radio stations. They were giving away their content, but unlike public radio stations, they weren't doing on-air pledge drives. And to make matters worse, for newspapers, you had this guy. This is Craig Newmark. And Craig Newmark, you know, not intentionally, destroyed their business model. He destroyed the business model of newspapers. He founded Craigslist. And as you know, Craigslist made newspaper classifieds irrelevant. When was the last time anybody in this room looked at a newspaper classified ad? Exactly. So now you could advertise your car or your roommate for free, and you could reach a much wider audience. And most newspapers were blindsided by this. They did not expect this to happen. And they didn't realize how disruptive this technology would be to their core business. And all the while, we in public radio were largely immune to this kind of disruption, you know, because our business model relies on listeners who voluntarily, you know, contribute their money to the local station because A, they believe in our mission, and B, because they're used to doing it. They're used to helping out. And that money really sort of enables many of the 900-plus stations in the public radio network to pay subscription fees to NPR And that money accounts for 40% of our revenue, right? And the secret to our success has been the much hated on-air pledge drive. Each station that broadcasts NPR content is independent, and it also depends in part on being a gateway for our content, for our programming, right? So for most of the past 40 years, the only way to hear our content was through your local public radio station. Well, we have our own version of Craig Newmark. It's the late Steve Jobs. Now, in addition to being one of the great American inventors, up there with Edison and Ford, Steve Jobs created this. This is iTunes. And iTunes popularized podcasts. And what it means is that the traditional gatekeeper, your local public radio station, has competition. You can now listen on your own schedule. Now, this is very disruptive, right? Because how can a station raise revenue from listeners if you are not listening to the station when they air the pledge drive? And a lot of very smart people at NPR, at PRI, at public radio stations all across the country are putting their heads together to figure out ways around this dilemma. Because we know that over-the-air listening has a limited lifespan. This is a fact. The technology just won't allow for traditional terrestrial radio to persist. You're not going to be getting into your car and flipping on the radio in 10 years or 15, certainly not in 20 years' time. You're going to be listening in a different way. So what do we do? Well, let me go back a bit further than Edward R. Murrow to start to think about how we might turn this disruption into an asset. So I like to say that journalism essentially begins when Moses sends spies into Canaan. I think that this is Joshua coming back saying, yeah, it's good, let's go in. I like to think of journalism as the second oldest profession in the world. And no matter what anyone tells you, you know, like there's no future in journalism, or like that getting into the news business, and this is particularly aimed toward the students, you know, getting into the news business today is like getting into the stagecoach business at the turn of the 20th century. I think it's nonsense. And here's why. Because there is and always will be a demand for information. And the only way humans can absorb and assimilate that information is limited. We can see I can see text on a page, I can see a moving image, I can see a still image, I can hear audio. That's it. There's no other way we can absorb information. That is never going to change unless we are genetically modified to change, and that's a possibility. I heard a TED Talk on that. But what is changing is how we're delivering that content, right, to all those ears and all those eyes, right? But as I say, until science changes it, we know that content will be available as text, probably on a digital screen or device, as audio, probably on demand, again digitally, a video, maybe 3D, maybe interactive. So the good news is that there always will be a demand for this, right? The bad news is trying to figure out how to commoditize news, how to turn this into a sustainable business. And I know we have some really smart members of the faculty here tonight who are devoting their time to figuring that out. And I hope they're successful. We all hope all the students here hope they're successful, or else you guys won't find jobs. Now, the question is, how do we do this? Well, if I had the answer, I would be very rich, or I'd be a faculty member at the Annenberg School. So let me reframe the question and ask this. Can we look at news as perhaps primarily a public trust rather than a self-sufficient revenue generator, right? And can we sort of start to look at news? Is it time for us to surrender to the idea that news is unlikely to be the main driver of revenue for news organizations? Which seems weird, right? How can news not be the main driver of revenue? Well, news is, of course, fundamental to serving the public. It's fundamental to enabling all of us to make informed decisions as citizens, right? It's vital to our democracy. And for an organization like NPR, news is our core. It is the essence of who we are. It is the most powerful force in our arsenal of content. But news, and certainly the kind of news we produce, is also very expensive, right? NPR today has more foreign and domestic bureaus than almost any single news organization in this country. I remember when I went to Berlin in 2000, I was among, these are the other organizations that had bureaus. We had the Chicago Tribune, the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Boston Globe, the Miami Herald, the Dallas Morning News, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the New York Times, all of the television networks. Today you've got NPR, the Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times left. So it's a different world. And to keep that coming, we need to contribute the bulk of our arsenal. We need to contribute the bulk of our budget to news. So all these things have been on my mind for a long time. And in January of last year, I left my old job as the host of Weekend All Things Considered. I did that for about 4 years to take on a new job that was by no means certain. It was a program that we launched in March of last year called the TED Radio Hour. Now, this is Weekend All Things Considered. That's me in the studio. This is one of the oldest shows in public radio. And this has been on the air since the 1970s. It's on most stations. It has a solid audience of about 2 million people every week. Many of my colleagues in the news division thought I was totally crazy to do this. They were saying, why would you leave the prestige of news to go into, something that's uncertain? But I felt like it was a risk worth taking. I'd spent nearly 4 years working harder than I ever did in my life trying to reinvent this show. And we did things on the show that I am more proud of than almost anything else in my life, But year after year, despite the quality of the show, despite creating a show that was better than ever, we were seeing a drop in our over-the-air audience. And it wasn't just us. It was across the board for all of our programs. And that's happening even though the quality of our programming, I would argue, is better today than ever. I mean, if you want to talk about the golden age of public broadcasting, we are living in it. I mean, you can turn on NPR any day and listen to Morning Edition, All Things Considered. I heard an incredible story by the Kitchen Sisters this morning about the Italian mafia in Palermo. What a beautiful story. It's amazing. You would never hear that anywhere else. And that's the era we're living in. I mean, the kind of creativity and the kind of innovation that's happening in radio with shows like Radio Lab and of course, This American Life are mind-blowing. So let me say this. I believe our audiences will grow. I really believe that. I am confident of that. But where that growth will come from is also becoming clear. It will happen in the digital space. It will not happen over the air. And it will happen as we begin to experiment with and create more programs and content that are not time-sensitive or time-specific. Programs like This American Life or Radio Lab or my show, the TED Radio Hour. Now, TED, as many of you know, stands for, it's not a person, there's nobody named Ted. Stands for Technology, Entertainment, Design. It was a conference that was started in the early 80s. It was bought in the late 90s by a very, very interesting guy named Chris Anderson, who really turned it into the powerhouse that it is today. And one of the reasons why it has become a powerhouse is because they began to post their content online in the middle of last decade. Today, more than 1 billion people have seen a TED video. It's incredible. Almost 1 out of 7 humans on planet Earth has seen a TED video. A lot of those people are living in Africa, in Asia, in rural parts of the world where they don't have access to education. TED is a game changer. It is absolutely a game changer. So what we do on our show is we take a theme, like collaboration or identity, or our show this weekend is about branding. But essentially, all of our shows are really about human nature and about human psychology and how we interact with the things in the world around us. And we find very different people who have talked about issues related to that. We bring them back into the studio. I interview them. We intersperse those interviews with bits of TED Talk. We score them beautifully. And it's really a really great, we think, a really great show. Our hope is that we're going to take you on this journey that is going to change a part of the way you see the world. Now, I'm not saying that I want you to hear the show and then expect you to go to Tibet and join a monastery and wear orange robes. Like, that's not what I mean. But what I mean by that is that you might hear an episode of our show, and that night you might look up at the sky and say, wow, I haven't looked at the stars in a long time. And, in places like LA or Washington with all the light pollution, it's not always easy. But, you know, you go up high and you look up, and it's pretty amazing. It's pretty magical to think that, and I didn't do this until we did a whole show about space, to look up at the stars and to say, I am looking at the past. I mean, it's crazy. The closest star to us is 800 years ago. I mean, we are looking at the past in real time. How crazy is that? And I rediscovered that through our show and through my son, who looks up at, my 5-year-old who looks up at the stars at night. So, you know, the thing about our show is that each episode can be heard the day it's released. It can be heard a week later. It can be heard a year later, and it will not sound any less relevant. And I think that's the reason why in a very short period of time we've experienced really explosive growth, right? I mean, as Dean Wilson mentioned, we're the fastest growing show in the history of public radio, which is incredible to me. We're on 500 stations. We have 1.2 million listeners listening on the air and almost 700,000 voluntarily downloading the podcast every week. And we really didn't anticipate that. And we have pretty significant data on who is listening. We know that the average age of our audience, of our listeners, is 36. And we know that by nature they're curious, they're hungry for great storytelling and big ideas. We know that each week thousands of people are just discovering the show all around the world. Now, that digital audience that goes through a few minor hurdles to subscribe to our podcast is incredibly loyal. It's an incredibly engaged audience. And we know that we have the potential to experiment with, and bear with me, tasteful and tactful sponsorship that may one day enable a show like ours to give back a significant amount of revenue that we bring in, money that could be used to serve our core brand, which is news. This American Life and Radiolab are pioneering new ways of working with sponsors to make their shows more sustainable, to make what they do possible, and to do it while maintaining their independence, integrity, and quality. And I think that as we continue to brainstorm ways of building a robust future for public radio, we will look to those shows and other shows and begin to experiment more and more with those models. And what do I mean by that? I'm not saying that we'll have traditional commercials. I'm not saying that we will sell our soul for a few bucks. But I am saying that we will have to get out of our comfort zone a bit and understand that to keep paying for news and to keep paying for great programming, we're going to have to be a little bit more entrepreneurial. There is no other choice. Our future cannot depend only on the voluntary goodwill of millions of listeners anymore. It's a dangerous proposition, I believe. Now, there's a lot of great content out there in the world today, but nobody can do what public radio can do, right? There isn't anything out there like Radiolab or This American Life or Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me or Fresh Air. There isn't anything else in news radio that comes close to Morning Edition or All Things Considered. That is our brand. That is our currency. Public media plays a very important and unique role in our culture. And while I don't believe it would be in our interest or in the interest of the public we serve to shift away from our non-commercial mission, I do believe with all my heart that we have to draw some lessons from some of the more nimble and creative commercial outlets. I mean, you can go on BuzzFeed and find out which Star Wars character you most resemble, and I've done that, I admit. I am most like Boba Fett. It's just physical resemblance. There are these wonderful videos of joyful babies and cats playing with yarn on Huffington Post, and I love those. They're great. Or top 10 places to see a sunset around the world. Who doesn't want to kill like 10 minutes at work checking that out? Even Dean Wilson does it. I know, he told me. But if you look closely at those sites, and they generate revenue, and they're only, in the case of BuzzFeed, 3-4 years old, Huffington Post 5-6 years old, both of them in the top 10 news websites in the country. Those features that bring you to the site also enable BuzzFeed and Huffington Post to do serious reporting that got Huffington Post a Pulitzer Prize 2 years ago, and reporting that almost got BuzzFeed a Pulitzer Prize this year. I mean, they've been nominated. So imagine if we could take away some of the anxiety over budgets and dwindling resources in news by bringing in more revenue from non-news programs like ours and others to help subsidize news. It's not where we are today, but it could be in the not-too-distant future. And I think if we accept this, and are more or less okay with it, we can come up with really great, transparent, and valuable ways of partnering up with sponsors who want to help us continue to do what we do. As I say, it doesn't mean sacrificing our integrity or our values or independence, but it does mean pushing the boundaries just a bit and acknowledging that we have amazing opportunities today. In public radio, our most valuable asset is our integrity, right? That's our currency. And the experience of serendipity, turning on KCRW or KPCC here in Southern California and just discovering something really cool at that very moment, that's what makes us different. And those stations and the 900 other stations in the public radio world, they're able to do that because listeners like you and me, we trust that those and know that those stations will curate an authentic and interesting and surprising experience for us. We can sort of outsource our creativity to them and just say, I'm going to sit back and turn it on, and I'm going to know that there's going to be something really cool and worthwhile listening to. So, listeners here in Southern California, I think will still want to hear Steve Chiotakis host Afternoon Drive Time because he's part of the community. They'll want to hear Madeline Brand or Alex Cohen or Larry Mantle because those folks are, they are what connects you to this community and to us, to NPR. And so I think instead of just being the gateway to public radio content, those stations will increasingly be seen as vital to why people listen to public radio in the first place, right? I mean, they do listen for international and national programming, but they also want to listen to those programs through the prism that a station like KPCC or KCRW provides. And I think the challenge for the stations, for all of us in public radio, is to adapt to the changing technology. The stations here in LA are actually at the forefront of this revolution. And NPR needs those stations, not just for their ability to send out a signal, a broadcast signal, but as a gateway to connect with listeners from a local perspective. I've been at NPR for 17 years. I know sometimes people sort of look at me and they say, really? Because it seems a little weird. I got there when I was 22, and I've been very fortunate to be part of this family and this community. It's been an amazing adventure and career for me, and I feel grateful and lucky every day that I get to work around some of the most incredible and inspiring reporters and editors and hosts. My idols were Scott Simon and Robert Siegel and Dan Shore and God, they're my, obviously Dan's passed away, but these guys are my colleagues. It's amazing to me. I think about it every day. When I came there 17 years ago, I saw Robert Siegel in the hallway and I just couldn't believe it, There's Susan Stamberg and Nina Totenberg and and even saying it now is weird after 17 years. My heroes are my colleagues. But they are. And that's why I'm optimistic. I think we are lucky that we've had more time and space to absorb all the change and all the disruption than the newspaper industry or other parts of the media have had. But I also think we would do well to assimilate the lessons from those other places to make sure that our future is secured. As I said earlier today at the Annenberg School, this is our Gutenberg moment, right? Gutenberg upended how information is disseminated, and the next big change would come more than 550 years later with the digital revolution. We are living in an incredibly interesting time. Gutenberg challenged the gatekeepers of his day, the noblemen, the landlords, the princes, and the kings. He also democratized information. That's where we are now. And I think it's too early for us to fully understand all of the implications, but it also means we are living in an amazing moment in history where we are probably better placed than almost anyone out there, we in public media, to help our audience distinguish the signal from the noise. Thank you so much. And again, it's been a real honor to speak to you.
These are on? Yes.
Yes.
It's so nice when it works.
Yes. Right.
Thank you so much for that. And before we go to questions from the audience, I have a couple. And I'm sure they're going to ask about your idea of the business model and the changing need for entrepreneurship and all of that. So I'm not going to ask any of that. What I'm interested in is something to me that's ironic about this medium and one of the reasons I love it, and I have a lot of my former radio students in the room tonight, that it seems to me that the basis that never changes is that story is the most important thing. Storytelling. And radio is, or audio as we call it now, is a storyteller's medium, which is why I love it the best. Talk a little bit about that and why that's still important as we're educating the future journalists of the world.
So I would go even further, Judy, and say that we're in like a storytelling golden age. If you look at the top 10 podcasts on iTunes, This American Life, Radiolab, the TED Radio Hour, The Moth. I mean, there's a reason why 4 of the top 10 podcasts, and I think it's an important measure because podcast listening is the canary in the coal mine. That is where we are headed, to digital listening. It may not be a podcast, but it's going to be some future form of that. People are hungry for stories. And, you know, for a long time, the thinking was we've got to make things shorter, we've got to make news stories shorter and snappier and quicker, and there may be something to that. I'm not saying that's wrong. But I think that the interpretation, the flip side of that was that people don't really have time for anything that is long, and that is actually not true. People will make time for stories, for ideas that is worth their time. And so we're in this period now where audio storytelling is really experiencing a renaissance. I mean, storytelling is experiencing a renaissance, right? I mean, this is part of human nature. This is why we know what the Sumerians did and the Phoenicians did, right? Because people are sitting around and telling us about that. And now they just go to some bar in Brooklyn and stand up and tell a story for the Moth, you know?
And your show,
right,
TED Radio Hour, which I love, I should say, you take the best bits and then you weave around it and fill in and enrich it.
Right.
And one of the pieces I heard on space, you were talking about the stars and the universe, and you used Brian Greene, who is a scientist who can really talk like a person. Is that what you look for? There are a lot of them who can't. And finding those people, what do you look for when you're interviewing people for your show?
What I love about TED Talks and TED speakers is that most of them have a real talent of explaining this very complex research that they do in a way that is not, they don't dumb it down, they don't find the lowest common denominator, but they make it, it's like Neil deGrasse Tyson on Cosmos or what Carl Sagan used to do, you know? They understand that it's really important to push their ideas and their research out there to the public. And if any of you have ever read, and I know many of you have, an academic paper, especially one with like formulas and, you know, lots of numbers in them, it can be intimidating, right? I mean, I look at some of these abstracts and I'm like, whoa, I don't even understand like the title of this thing. But oftentimes if you can extract that and you can explain it in a real way, which is one of the reasons why, by the way, why people love behavioral economics, because, you know, traditional economics isn't sort of accessible and interesting to everybody, but behavioral economics is if you can tell somebody why the school system, you know, performs this way as a result of this shift in this neighborhood, that's interesting to people. And so I think it's the same with the people who we find for the show. I mean, Brian Greene is a great example. He's a cosmologist. He studies very, very complex things about the universe. And he can make it engaging and understandable. He can make us, I mean, the universe is infinite, and he has a way of making it possible to imagine these things in your mind, which is an incredible talent, you know, and a gift.
And another thing, you were talking about, someday we won't be listening to radio in our cars, we'll be getting our audio. And by the way, I noticed that your presentation used photographs, which is, there's no such thing as radio anymore.
Right.
National Public Radio changed to NPR for that reason, that they're more than radio. So it occurs to me, though, and I hope this is true, that radio will be always there because, or audio will be always there, because it's the one thing that can go to a mobile device where you're not risking your life to listen to it. You don't have to look at it.
It's the only medium that you can experience and do other things. You can cook, you can run, you can drive, you can, you know, in my case, sometimes I'm, you know, one of my 5 or 3-year-olds like, Daddy, please help me wipe my butt, you know. I go do that. I mean, wipe my nose. You can do lots of things and listen to the radio, right? So don't tell me you haven't done that.
Yeah. I should also say that I think you have the best name in the business. It's like Guy Raz. It's both down to earth and exotic at the same time.
Thank you.
It's just fabulous. So
Thank
I
you.
want to open this up to the audience, but for Q&A. But before anybody gets up and asks a question, I want to point out that that's Q for question. Try not to make statements or speeches. We'd like ends in a question mark.
My question is 2 parts. One is, what's next in terms of the sponsorship model? And I know we were talking about, you know, what's the business model like. So there's the what's next question, but there's also the how do you maintain the integrity that public radio listeners trust NPR and other public radio broadcasters for? How do you maintain that trust with whatever's next?
Yeah, you maintain it by exercising good judgment. It's always going to be a call at the end of the day. It's always going to be a judgment call. Here's the thing. The FCC restricts what we can say over the air. So I can't go on the air and say, hi, everybody, this is Guy Raz, and I drive a sweet Audi, and you should too. And by the way, Audi supports a TED Radio Hour. Because I can't do what Howard Stern does. You know, hey, everybody, LifeLock will change your life. LifeLock has, you know, changed my life. I can't do that.
Among other things you can't do that Howard Stern does.
Right. Exactly. Fair point. Thank you. But the digital space is a kind of a black hole. No one really knows what you know. It's a place for experimentation. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm going to do that Audi thing on the podcast. But what if I were to say on the podcast, hey, you know, in the middle of the podcast, which you could fast forward through if you wanted to, and I said, hey, everybody, it's Guy here. Just a quick shout out to our friends at Acme. You know what they make, a really innovative design, you know, and blah blah blah. They're huge supporters of the TED Radio Hour. Check them out at acme.com. Now, that is tricky, right? It's very tricky. So the question is, how do you handle that? Well, there's nobody in public radio who is ever going to trade in their integrity for sponsorship, because then the value, my value, is diminished. Why would somebody want to listen to me if I'm just shilling for some company, right?
But can you if you say you should take a look at acme.com because they're good to us, right, and then the owner of acme.com turns out to say strange things in a recorded telephone interview. I'm just making that up.
Then, right.
How could that happen?
Okay, so what if that happened? And so here's the thing. First of all, I would say we don't have the answers for every scenario. It's impossible to know. We're going to have to exercise judgment, and our listeners are going to have to, they're going to have to place faith in us, and we're going to have to hope that they trust us. So let's say the owner of Acme.com is a total dirtbag and, you know, does all these nasty things. Well, we also have the platform to be transparent and say, hey, everybody, it's Guy here. Remember last week we did this ad for Acme? Just want to let you know, we're totally severing ties with them because they're jerks. Like, what? I mean, the thing is that we don't know. Like, we don't know what we can do, and we don't know what the possibilities are. But I think we have to explore them because we don't have a choice. Because you're a young guy, and if you want to be listening to public radio in 50 years, we're going to have to be more entrepreneurial. We have no choice. We're not going to be able to depend on sponsorships and on listener donations to continue to grow and thrive. I think it's really important for us to understand that there are going to have to be ways for us to bring in revenue, because news, I believe, if you look at the trend in news, whether it's Jeff Bezos buying the Washington Post or Pierre Omidyar starting his own news organization, A lot of smart, very rich people understand that news is a public trust. It's not going to be profitable. It's going to be really hard to make money off news. There are niches. You've got Vox and you've got BuzzFeed, but news gathering is expensive, and it's going to be hard to make it profitable.
And you made a point of saying that shows like yours, which you might call the entertainment side,
It is, for sure.
could be used to fund the news side, so
amazing.
the news side could just
Yeah.
keep giving out tote bags to people like me. Yeah.
Right.
Could they get better than tote bags, really?
Yeah, I'll work on it.
Okay. All right. Anybody else? Yes, back there.
Great. One kind of more serious, one lighter. Curious in terms of war reporting, what do you think some most important information that we don't hear about, or what's, yeah. And secondly, what is NPR on Pandora or Hitch?
So I'll answer your second question. Pandora is just music. They don't have a talk feature yet, but we are on iTunes Radio, and iTunes Radio is now the third biggest streaming site after iHeartRadio. So it goes Pandora, iHeartRadio, and then iTunes. iTunes Radio it was only launched like a year ago, and it's just shot to the top. So yes, we are on Pandora. There are other places where you can find us streaming, obviously through the NPR app, and we hope you all listen to the NPR app or your local, because the NPR app will bring the signal for the feed, the stream from your local station. But there's also Swell and other places where people tuned in radio, where people are listening to NPR content. And we are developing something called we're also developing our own version of that, which should be coming out in the next several months. In terms of war reporting, I mean, what are we not hearing? I guess the question I'd ask you is it that you wonder whether there's some sort of, not conspiracy, but intentional effort to keep things from the public? And I would say no. I think that war reporting is very complicated, especially in times of heightened war activity. So when I covered Iraq and Afghanistan, the American public was very engaged in those stories, and the military was, the military wanted to see positive stories about the military being aired and broadcast. I do think that there was a range of content information out there, as there is now. But I don't believe anything is really being held. I mean, what's being held from the public? Here's the biggest difference between war reporting today and war reporting in the Vietnam era. The Vietnam era, actually, you saw dead bodies on television. You actually saw really gruesome things on TV.
But you saw them a week late because it was film.
You saw them a week late, but we don't
back.
see that anymore. It is not something that you see on television, and I'm not casting value judgment on that. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that definitely is not something that is being broadcast or shown to the American public for a variety of reasons that news organizations, have decided on.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Yes.
First of all, like I said, I thought you did a wonderful presentation. Like I said, everybody in the room, that's it. Well, take away something from tonight. Now, with that said, I'm part of this millennial generation, right? 1980 to 2000, born in that age.
Yep.
And I've been told multiple times, we can't focus on a sole linear thought, we can't multitask what we think we can. And because of that, I ask you, how do you attract this new generation of viewers? Now, I know you just mentioned this, that people actually can stay focused on one subject for a long period of time. You can listen to these hour-long stories. But what I'm asking you is this new generation of kids who are fed information instantly, look for that instant gratification. How do you attract them to a 1-hour story where they really do, for your complex ideas or instincts, they need their entire focus to be on that story. How do you attract that generation of listeners?
So, it's a good question, and if I had the answer, as I say, I'd be a rich man. I mean, we don't think about that consciously. Like, we don't sit around with our group and say, how are we going to make the show appeal to a certain audience, because we can't. Like, if we program, I think there's really only one thing you can know about attracting any audience, especially the so-called millennials, is that if you target your programming to them, they're going to turn it off. They'll see right through it. If you create like self-consciously youth-oriented programming, people born between 1982 and 2000 are just going to call BS on it. They're going to know that it's nonsense. And I think the key is to create great content, is to not, most of my staff are so-called millennials. They are millennials. That's what you call them, right? Let's just use that term. We did a whole show about it. It's a weird term, but most people on my staff are in their 20s. And I spend a lot of time with people in their 20s because I teach, and I am so optimistic about that generation, because I'm part of Gen X, right? And so we're small. You guys are huge. There are as many millennials as there are baby boomers in America today. So, despite all these stories about lazy millennials and they live with their parents and they can't figure shit out, the reality is that your generation has no choice but to make a huge impact, simply because your size, you are going to have as big an impact, if not greater, than the boomer generation, because you have no choice. You are a massive part of the American population. So innovation and huge disruptive change is, of course, affecting your generation, but your generation is also better positioned to adapt to it than anybody else. So we don't program our stuff for you. We know that a lot of people your age do listen to our show, and which is awesome. I mean, I was at the school today. I couldn't believe how many students were citing the show, like specific things about it. And that, to me, is a secret. Like, make smart, entertaining programs that are interesting, informative, inspiring, whatever, that I would want to hear. Like, I'm my own test market, We don't really run panels. If we like it, we think that other people will like it. So
yeah, and I think great stories. Millennials are human beings.
Yeah.
And
also, and Judy
I'm
also.
Just saying that right? James Santelli, he's a great storyteller. Your brother sitting right there, one of the best storytellers I've ever had come through a classroom. And he knows what great storytelling is. He knows about This American Life. I mean, they are, like all of us, suckers for a great story.
And I would also say, Judy, quickly, that millennials are different than my generation and previous ones in that they're really motivated by changing the world. I mean, you can't put a blanket statement on millennials because, of course, they're different. But by and large, a lot of kids who are just coming out of college, they really want to make an impact. They want to change the world, and you see and you feel that. And I find that to be really amazing, really awesome. Like when I graduated college, everybody wanted to go to law school or like into banking and finance. And of course that still exists, but I just meet a lot of people who are coming out of college now who just want to make an impact, They want to do something with their lives that's meaningful.
Mel.
Hi, Mel Rogers, PBS SoCal. Question for you about your financial model from a baby boomer who's also been trying to get these same things out. This model where there will be entertainment, mass appeal content that will be able to make money and fund the mission content that you're talking about. Does it assume that the institution remains completely a public media institution, a not-for-profit enterprise, or does it assume something else?
I think that's a great question. You would know more about this than I do. I think, of course, it remains a not-for-profit. And we are, as you are, restricted in how we can, in the amount of money we can generate, in the ways we can generate revenue. I think there's more opportunity to experiment in the digital space, both in television and radio. The BBC has a for-profit arm, BBC Digital. It's been quite successful. I am not sure. I don't know the answer to that. But I think it's worth exploring a for-profit wing or element within the nonprofit umbrella. We have to remain nonprofit. We have to remain non-commercial. That's why we can do what we do. There is no Radio Lab or This American Life or NewsHour or All Things Considered in commercial media for a reason. Because, you know, they're not, those kinds of shows wouldn't be given the space to do that. They exist in public media because we can do that. So, so we have to stay, I believe we have to stay nonprofit, we have to stay non-commercial, but we have to be willing to explore elements of that and find places where we can bring some of that in without, you know, without compromising the integrity of what we do and our mission.
We have time for one more, and I saw somebody back there. Yes.
My name is Dr. Alexandra Oscar. I'm a former school principal, and actually, based on your conversation, I was thinking this would be a great opportunity for entrepreneurs that may be sitting here. But I think there's a great need, especially in education, for us to focus more not just on the reading and writing, but on the speaking. And many times when I'm speaking with students, really sharing with you, and finding that the students that can communicate the best are the ones that later on are accepted to great universities like USA, are leaders wherever they go, and are just able to express themselves. So I just see this as an opportunity actually for all the communicators that are here to maybe develop a curriculum to help us in the school district to be able to better teach our children to be able to communicate and speak and give reports and do whatever it is that is necessary.
Well, it was a statement, and I agree with it. But.
Yes. And in British schools, they you know, it's not as much anymore, but they in some of them, they teach declamation, and you go to, and when you meet British kids, they tend to be better public speakers than Americans. You know, we're not as good at it, and I agree. The one thing I would say though, and I've learned my lesson because I teach at universities, and a significant portion of the grade goes to, you know, is based on how much you participate in class. And the reason why I do that is because I bring my colleagues in from NPR, and like I don't want to be embarrassed and have the students ask no questions. Like, you know, I brought in David Green a couple weeks ago, and like I want, you know, if I'm bringing David in or I'm bringing in Michelle Martin or other people who have brought in, like they better get a lot of questions. So, but I started to rethink this because a lot of my best students are actually really introverted, and they have great, interesting things to say to me in office hours or face-to-face, but they're just not quite comfortable speaking in a group. And I get that, you know, I understand that. So I think we also have to think about, there's a TED Talk about this, about the introverts too, and about how to make sure that they understand that they're valued and they bring something to the table.
And I think radio is a great place for introverts.
Totally.
It's a great place to do your stories and talk to people. I mean, I thank you for bringing that up, and thank you, Guy Raz, for coming tonight.
Thanks, Judy. Thank you.
I knew there was something else. Thank all of you for coming tonight. And let's hear it again for Guy. Thank you.